Hello, I'm Josh Anderson, the grandson of Isabel Thomas, and it is my pleasure today to bring you the story of Isabel Thomas's life. This is an adaptation from the presentation given by my sister, Molly Anderson, and myself at Isabel's memorial service that was held on October 8th, 2011. Isabel lived long enough to fill many books. This one you're about to watch is filled with the most significant events that shaped her spectacular life. Before we get started, let's take a moment to reflect on the world events she lived through while we gaze at this beautiful picture of her. She was born in 1909, just after the first Model Ts came rolling off the assembly line. She saw World War I, the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, World War II, Vietnam, the gas crisis in the late 70s, the introduction of the personal computer in the mid-80s, the internet boom in the mid-90s, and the iPhone just a few short years ago. In the coming pages, we're going to share Isabel's incredible journey with you. We've organized Isabel's spectacular life into these 7 fascinating chapters. Let's begin. Isabel was born in 1909 in Painesdale, Michigan. She was the 8th of 11 children. Her parents, pictured here on the left, were Isaac Tapani and Sophia Roinanen, both immigrants to the United States of America, one from Sweden and the other from Finland. When Isabel was very young, the family moved from Michigan to a farm in Brule, Wisconsin. She lived with her whole family, all 13 of them, in a 2-room cabin, similar to the one depicted on the right side of this screen. Life was very different back then. Let's let her tell us what life was like way back then.
When we lived on the farm, there was no telephone, there was no TV, there was no indoor toilets, no running water, no electricity. We had a 2-seater out by the barn, and we had cows and chickens and 1 horse till I was 12 years old.
Wow.
So it was altogether different.
It was different, all right. In fact, conventional wisdom tells us that kids today grow up way too fast. Let's challenge that. When was the last time you heard of a 12-year-old doctor delivering a baby? Well, that brings us to our next chapter. At 12 years old, so now we're talking about 1921, Isabel moved to the outskirts of Duluth, Minnesota to live with her older sister Lempi and her husband Adolf. Lempi at the time was expecting her first child, and as luck would have it, she went into labor one evening while a snowstorm blanketed the area. And Adolf, like any good husband of the day, hitched up the horse and buggy and went for the doctor. Well, you know what? Sometimes babies don't wait for the licensed doctor to arrive. That's right. Isabel had to play doctor for real, and to the utter amazement of everyone at the time, she successfully delivered that baby. When Adolf and the doctor finally returned, they found Isabel and Lempi shaking and crying, but little baby Alice was no worse for the wear. And Alice is the older child in the picture on the right in front of Adolf here. Well, now, a year later, Isabel moved from Minnesota to Chicago, and she found herself in a situation she described as absolutely awful. See, she had gone to live with her mother's sister, Kate, and Kate's family. She found out very quickly when she arrived that Kate's family did not get along at all, and it put her in a very compromising situation. Isabel was miserable. She felt like she needed a miracle to escape this hellhole. How was young Isabel going to get out of this one? One day, another of Isabel's relatives came to visit Aunt Kate and her family, and fortunately realized what a bad situation Isabel was in. That relative passed the word of Isabel's plight to her oldest sister Miriam, who lived in Salt Lake City. Miriam quickly wrote a letter to Isabel inviting her to come to Salt Lake to live with her and her family in hopes of getting Isabel out of there. Unfortunately, Aunt Kate intercepted that letter before Isabel could see it and refused to let Isabel leave. From that point forward, Kate screened Isabel's mail, ensuring Isabel couldn't receive any additional instructions for leaving her and her family. But Miriam outsmarted Aunt Kate. She used her ingenuity to get a train ticket and instructions to come to Salt Lake City to Isabel through a friend of Isabel's that she knew in Chicago. Her name was Rosemary. Rosemary delivered the letter and the train ticket to Isabel and helped Isabel sneak out of the house. Isabel then made her way to the train station all by herself and left for Salt Lake City. Let's listen to her talk about her journey from Wisconsin to Salt Lake City.
How did you get from Wisconsin to Utah?
The first time I went from Wisconsin to Minnesota and lived with a sister for a year. And she was going to have a little baby and she was all by herself. So I went and lived in Minnesota for 1 year. And then I went from Minnesota to Chicago and lived in Chicago for 1 year, went to school. And then I came to Salt Lake on a train from Chicago to Salt Lake.
Once in Salt Lake City, she lived with Miriam and her husband and helped take care of their little boy George and then the twins. She attended East High School, that is pictured here on the left-hand side, and graduated in 1928. Isabel then enrolled in nursing school at Holy Cross Hospital. She graduated there in 1931 with her nursing degree. This was one of her top accomplishments of her life. When she spoke of this, her pride always came beaming through like sunshine on a cloudy day. But it's not over yet. Life is about to get a lot more interesting. And what could be more interesting than a secret marriage? You see, after nursing school, Isabel completed postgraduate work in obstetrics and pediatrics and started working. Shortly after, Isabel met her husband-to-be, Fred S. Thomas, in Salt Lake City. As luck would have it, they met playing cards, which you'll soon learn was a lifelong passion for Isabel. Isabel and Fred fell madly in love and wanted to spend the rest of their lives together as husband and wife. But here's the catch. This was the Great Depression, and there was a law that only one person per family could hold a job. They both needed and wanted to keep their jobs, so they needed a solution. Their solution? You guessed it. Get married, but keep it a secret. In 1934, they went to Tooele County Courthouse and obtained a marriage license. You see, Tooele County did publish marriage licenses in the newspaper like the other counties did. And to make that secret stick, they only invited 3 people to their wedding. Fred's parents and sister, who are pictured here on the left with Fred and Isabel on their wedding day. Yes, their marriage was secret, but their love for one another was well known by all who knew them. And so, for the next 48 years, Fred and Isabel built a great life together. They had 3 girls, Barbara, who's the oldest, born in 1936, followed by Betty, who is my mother, and then Bonnie. They shared all the challenges of raising 3 daughters, but had something more that most couples of their time didn't have. They also shared a business together. You see, Fred bought the Capital Insurance Agency in 1944 from a friend of his. And as many of you may know, running a business as a solopreneur can be an overwhelming challenge, and most fail in their first few years. Well, theirs didn't, largely because Isabel stepped in and became a highly effective business partner to Fred. She managed the finances, she did the bookkeeping, and she learned the insurance business enough to allow her to write insurance policies. In their later years, Fred and Isabel reduced the business so they could spend their time together going on cruises, traveling to foreign countries, playing golf, and most of all, socializing on the back porch with friends and family until Fred passed away at the tender age of 75 in 1982. Well, now that we've had a chance to go through the most significant events in Isabel's life, let's take a look at some of her passions outside of work. Isabel's zest for life expressed itself in everything she did and every time she spoke. In the summer months, Isabel could be found outside in her garden at her home on Browning Avenue. She loved growing and nurturing flowers, and it showed in the pristine condition of her garden, as seen here on the right. She had a sweet tooth and loved finished pastries. One of my fondest memories of her is when she would make cheese blitzes for me. Yum! And when it came to sweet rolls, Isabel was a connoisseur, and you could count on her having one every morning with a hot cup of coffee. She loved to shop, but that statement isn't exactly right. She loved to shop for bargains. She was drawn to sales like a magnet. And for that matter, she loved managing money, and her stewardship of the business investments ensured her family was never in need. She also loved playing cards, as we mentioned earlier. She played with her friends, with her family, on the kitchen table, in the car, at a restaurant, while waiting for food to arrive, anytime, any place, until her deteriorating eyesight in her final years made it impossible to see the cards anymore. She was a passionate woman. Well, this brings us to the final chapter, Isabel's wonderful golden years. In her golden years, Isabel enjoyed her family and friends very much. She interacted regularly with all 5 of her grandchildren and was blessed in knowing 6 of her great-grandchildren. In 2000, Isabel moved from her house on Browning Ave to Highland Cove Assisted Living, and there she made many new friends who brought her great joy and comfort in her final years. Isabel lived longer than any of her brothers or sisters or their spouses and all of her friends that she knew before moving to Highland Cove. Also, by living to 102, Isabel set a new longevity record for the Tapney family. When she turned 100, she took great pride in attending the governor's yearly centenarian celebration, and she's pictured here on the left with the governor and his wife at that celebration. Well, we have touched on many significant events from all 102 years of Isabel's spectacular life. Let's close with some reflections from Isabel herself.
I've had lots of happy memories. Lots and lots, more good ones than bad.
Thank you for sharing the story of Isabel's spectacular life with us. We love you, Grandma.